On May 13, 2013, Tony Ogando was from Nakuru, traveling on a public matatu to Nairobi. That is when he received a call. Who is calling him? It is Raphael Tuju's wife. Raphael was by then working as a cabinet minister, named by President Uhuru Kenyatta without portfolio. The wife was calling him over to her house, which was more of a request than a command. Tony hesitated, knowing the risks involved with such a move. After all, she was still his boss's wife. The romantic relationship the two secretly shared had been going on for a while now. The excitement of their impermissible relation had now gotten the best part of him. He agreed to see her. It was not going to be his first time. They had sneaked around and tapped. He wanted to see her too. After getting to Nairobi, he made his way to her house, unconscious of the impact and the repercussion that awaited him at the long run. Tony's job was to man the entrance to the Tuju family home. The position required vigilance and resilience, and so Tony was always at his post, watching over the entrance and exits. Tony Ogando's fate crossed with the Tuju family in the year 2008. He was a GSU officer assigned to protect the politician's home. This was after Raphael was appointed as the special legal advisor to the president on matters related to ethnic relations and media. During these routine shifts, that is when he first had an encounter with Mrs. Raphael Tuju, a calm woman, graceful and with a heightened confidence. This drew his attention. At the beginning, their encounter was exclusively formal and very brief. A usual hello, a nod, and sometimes a cautious thank you. At the beginning, there was no spark between them, and the woman acted with great courtesy, expressing her trust in Tony in matters regarding the family's safety. Tony also acted purely professional. But as days unfolded, things started to change. The minister's wife would sometimes lag behind at the gate, offering warm smiles and conversations to Tony anytime she was passing by. The gestures, though trivial, would gradually build a connection between the two. Tony started becoming expectant of the gestures, and Tuju's wife always reciprocated in fine-drawn manners, never missing at least a long glance or a radiant smile. But at least they ensured that their connection remained on the surface, and neither of them dared any suspicious moves. At this moment, Tony was just a GSU officer working as a security guard for the family, and Mrs. Tuju was just his boss's wife. However, beneath the curtains, the foundation of a bond so intoxicating was slowly blowing. For Tony, he was a committed man, first by the nature of his job and the fact that he was already married to his high school lover, Esther Okumu. Tony's relationship with his wife was so profound, and they had recently had a baby boy come into their lives. He was a committed father and husband, but as human, he always noted the differences between the lives of his own family and that of the Tuju family. Though he and his wife were far too young than the Tuju family, power and privilege was one thing his own family never got to experience. He was just a young man in the prime of his youth beginning to live, whereas the Tuju family, they were already established figures with remarkable influence, power, and resources. Out of these differences, Tony allowed some personal connection to grow drastically and somehow blurred his actual mission and reason as to why he was there in the first place. These encounters set a stage for events that would soon unfold, leading to very unpleasant outcomes. Raphael and his wife appeared as the perfect couple and were celebrated in public as a pair that was both committed and successful. Before the public eye, they were unshakable. They attended high-profile events together and were often photographed for glossy magazine spreads. They appeared united, emanating an aura of sophistication and stability. Their marriage was believed to be perfect, what a marriage union should be like. This made their relationship appear invulnerable to challenges that ordinary couples face. Raphael and his wife began their life together in the 1980s. By then, he was a young TV presenter, working for the Kenya television networks, KTN, as a news anchor. He drew people's attention across Kenya and beyond due to his charisma.
The focus of international interest turns to South Africa in the coming week. The African National Congress is scheduled to hold its first official meeting with the Praetorian government. These crucial talks are expected to...
During this time, he officiated his relationship with Ruth, holding a church wedding in 1986. This marked the beginning of their so-called enduring and successful marriage. During these times when Tony was working for the Tuju family, they were living in a palatial home in Karen Estate, a neighborhood occupied only by people who were indeed successful. Tuju and his wife lived in warmth and joy together with their 3 kids, 2 daughters and a son. Their kids marked their lives' pride. But as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, a drastic change was slowly creeping in between the power couple. Loneliness. His constant absence ended up creating a void in his wife's life. Despite the luxury in their current home and the attention she got from their children, Raphael's absence made her empty. His demanding schedule ended up casting Ruth long and lonely nights, longing for the companionship of the love of her life, Tuju, the man she married years ago. She almost dreaded the success they had built together, with a feeling as if it had cost her the time they were supposed to spend together. An emotional bridge between Ruth and Raphael began to build, and the loneliness was now a silent burden that Ruth carried, not easily understood or shared by others. As they celebrated every milestone of their success, the ache of their distance continued to persist, a deep sacrifice that they were both needed to offer. Working as a special advisor to President Kibaki, Tuju often left his current home to go perform his expected assignments. He was always traveling locally and internationally, creating more strain on the time he could spend with his wife and children. The distance and the gap grew even deeper, starting 2011 when Tuju announced his interest for presidency. He began his bid. The new chapter demanded even more of his time, energy and sacrifice, since his campaign trail required constant attention and presence. With such ambitions of getting the most powerful office in Kenya, this meant that Raphael would be more absent for Ruth and his family more than ever. His public appearances, strategizing sessions and meetings left almost no room for his family life. This was particularly the most challenging phase for Ruth. The loneliness that had been an overshadowed part of their marriage now became more intense. The weight of balancing between supporting her husband's career and her emotional well-being finally would take a toll on her. The strain between them was almost inevitable, something that could never be resolved in any form. This profoundly impacted on Ruth, trying to balance between her desires and what was required of her as Mrs. Raphael Tuju. As Raphael's presidential campaign intensified, he was caught in long and inevitable periods away from home as he traveled across the nation, gathering his votes. Out of such absence, Ruth began to struggle with her loneliness, unable to cope with the absence of the man she deeply loved. She was frustrated by the fact that the man she relied on for emotional support was now purely consumed by his political ambitions. The more he drifted away, the more she fell apart, until she finally found herself seeking solace elsewhere. What began as a coping mechanism grew into something more significant. Finally, her attention shifted to Tony Ogando, who began to fill the void she had been feeling in her life. This step marked the turning point for Ruth's life. When Raphael was busy consumed by his dreams, Ruth searched for love, attention, and support that she had been seriously yearning for. When she approached Tony, he did not turn down her advancement, and he decided to play his role, wanting to feel relevant in her life. His role was simple and straight: keep Ruth happy and keep their affair discreet. He executed his duty with decent approach. He provided her fully with attention and companionship she desired. In return, she showered him with everything he needed, money and material possession. He became her confidant too, providing him with care and material support. Ruth even rented a luxurious apartment for Tony at Gong Road area. Though their relationship was never public like that of Ruth and Raphael, Tony felt valued by her. However, the relationship between the two became too entangled, and finally, Tony somehow began to neglect his wife and family, since his focus had now shifted to Ruth. Esther, his wife, who he had left in their Eastland home, started getting troubled by her husband's change of behavior. She began to investigate on her husband, wanting to get some clarity on why Tony's behavior had changed. Shock hit Esther like a brick when she learned that Tony had moved in with Ruth Tuju. She was devastated by such revelation, and out of desperation, she contacted Raphael Tuju through a text message, revealing the nature of Ruth and Tony's relationship. This led to a feeling of absolute betrayal among the members of the two families, and sooner or later, their relationship became even more exposed. This seriously complicated their personal lives and public image. The scandal had seriously affected everyone involved. The revelations hit Tuju seriously too, and he became quite furious. But despite it all, as a public figure, Raphael had to contain his emotions, and he handled the matter with respect and caution. He had to maintain his well-known gentleman reputation. First, he called for a meeting at his current home. Ruth and Tony were invited. He confronted the two with their careless choices that they had made, reminding them that their relationship was not acceptable. He made them promise that they would end the affair immediately. This would help reclaim the boundaries that had been crossed, as well as try to repair the damage that had already happened. However, his gentle and mature approach to the matter went futile, since Ruth and Tony continued their affair in secret. Now, their relationship became more open and public. Tony, unable to hide his feelings, he began to show his affection for Ruth publicly. This added to the tension and complexity of the situation. Tony, overcome by his emotions, started texting Tuju's children, asking them about their mother's whereabouts. Such level of intrusion intensified the emotional turmoil among everyone involved. This showed an open defiance on the consequences of their selfish actions. This continued to strain the relationship between the two families. Tony started expressing his too much dependency on Ruth Tuju, and this deeply impacted on his life. He finally lost his job, and this left him financially crippled and professionally vulnerable. With his career in pieces, he heavily depended on Ruth, both financially and emotionally. Now, without being restrained by the professional demand like there before, Tony started visiting Ruth at their Karen home, showing up unannounced without considering the private space for the Tuju family. This conduct, driven by the despair, exacerbated the tension among the involved individuals, especially among the Tuju family members. They did not approve of Tony's intrusive visits, which heightened their discomfort and tension. Ruth's willingness and availability to support Tony both emotionally and financially made the situation even more complex. This intensified anger in Raphael Tuju, and he finally reached the breaking point due to Tony's unannounced visits and inappropriate hours. As a way of a reaction to such invasion, Raphael took legal actions against Tony. He acquired a restraining order on Tony, restraining him from coming to his home or any other premises, including Tuju's family members. On top of this, Raphael Tuju filed for a divorce, marking the end of the long-admired marriage. However, Tuju confirmed that the reason for him restraining Tony Ogando from his home was to restore some order and privacy for the family members, especially the children. He needed to protect his children from Tony's disrespectful appearances. Despite the restraining order put on him, his need for Ruth and disregard for the law made him visit Ruth at their Karen home. He had been invited by Ruth, and out of such desperation, he could not turn down her invitation. Ruth had continued her affair with Tony, despite the legal restraint put on place, and on May 2013, she invited him over to Karen. When Tony visited her, the security guards at the property restrained him, and they ended up getting into a physical altercation. He was beaten badly and later detained, facing trespass charges. And even after this arrest, the two still continued their affair. This finally led to their fall from grace, leading to one of the tragic events. On July 2013, Tony Ogando was found dead under mysterious circumstances in an apartment owned by Raphael Tuju. At the time of Tony's death, Tuju was away from the country. This raised numerous questions, given the intensity of the tension between him and the Tuju family. This marked the end of a chapter that was left unresolved. Some even accused Tuju of killing Tony Ogando. After an autopsy was conducted by the government pathologist Johannesson Odwo, reports indicated that Tony Ogunda's head suffered a severe injury, which led to his death. Also, at the scene where his body was found, a syringe containing a drug used to treat diabetes was discovered. However, Ogunda's family confirmed that Tony did not suffer from diabetes his whole life. 3 months later, Ruth Tuju's life had taken a shocking and unbelievable twist. She was no longer the high-profile wife. She was spotted selling matumbo and ugali at a city bar in Nairobi, a hotel she had opened, a life far from what she had lived for the past days. The conflict between her current and past life status was quite striking. It was quite a fall from grace, from luxury to hustle and hard work. back. And that is the unresolved case of Tony Ogando. So, in case of any updates, don't go away because we will keep you posted. In the meantime, consider subscribing and I will see you on the next one.